your state went a different direction than a lot of states.
Yeah.
You kept South Dakota open. You got criticized by a lot of people. You were praised by a lot of people for that decision. What led you down that path?
Well, I don't really think we got praised until months and months later, when people started to see the effects of what all these lockdowns were. You know, honestly, I think I did what every other governor in this country did. You know, I studied the science of the virus and watched what was happening in other countries, really looked at other states as they dealt with their first cases. I set up an emergency operations center a couple of months before we ever had any cases. I think the difference happened when I took it another step further and started to really talk to my general counsel and to constitutional attorneys. I really wanted to understand what my authority was as governor and what authority I didn't have. I'm just a big believer that when leaders overstep their authority, especially in a time of crisis, that's when we break this country. My number one commitment to the people of South Dakota was that I took an oath to the state constitution and the U.S. Constitution, and that I would adhere to it.
Right. And when you, I mean, we're sitting here in California. California example of a state that took everything to the extreme, and their numbers they weren't impressive.
No, and I would say that the consequences of the lockdowns that California has suffered, they're still dealing with today. So in South Dakota, we never once closed a single business. In fact, I didn't even define what an essential business was.
Not even in the first 15 days?
You know, I don't believe that governors have the authority to tell businesses that they're not essential. Never issued shelter in place. We never mandated anything such as masks. I basically stood up in front of the people of South Dakota and told them that I was going to trust them.
Right.
I'd give them all the information that I had. I would, you know, give them support, PPE. We would get through this together, but that I was going to let them use personal responsibility.
You also refused to prohibit businesses in your state from requiring COVID tests. I mean, there were some businesses that want to say, hey, you have to have a test to come in here. You allowed them to do that, and that angered some people on the right.
You know, I think that we're living in scary times. And we watched throughout this pandemic that the media and liberals used fear to control people. And they used fear to scare people and promote their agenda. So I had to keep constantly reminding people that I was going to do my job, but that also the power lies with the people. And that's the way our founders intended it. And that I wasn't going to go in and start mandating to private businesses where I didn't think the federal government had a role or the state government had a role. That there's a reason that we don't do that. And when conservatives are willing to take the same actions that liberals are, then I don't believe we're any better than them.
When you look at what the president has done, the mandates we've seen, and now we've got military, we're watching the effects of that. We've seen the stories about the Navy SEALs. You've got like a fourth of them that they might lose because of this. You also have businesses over 100 people have to have a COVID vaccine mandate or they're testing. You obviously think that that's far overreaching from the government.
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, I'm going to sue the federal government for their mandates on requiring businesses with 100 employees or more to have vaccines. We need to see their guidance to see really how to word that litigation. But I promised the people when I ran for governor that I would protect them from federal government intrusion. And I went, unfortunately, from President Trump to being on offense every day and solving problems to now being on defense every day, fighting the federal government on ways that they're trying to steal an authority that the states have and that the people have.
You've taken a lot of heat. You've gotten criticism from conservatives who say that you vetoed a bill that would have banned trans athletes in schools in your state. What is your response to that criticism?
Well, it's not true. I asked for a change to the bill, which the legislature did not support and accept. The change was to take out the first two sections, which would have put it in potential litigation, which would have tied up the bill and I wouldn't have been able to enforce it. So what I did, in fact, that very same week was that I issued 2 executive orders when the legislature killed the bill that were stronger, that protected girls' sports. And I want everybody to remember that years ago, the federal government was coming in and saying that boys had to play in girls' events at the sport of rodeo. And so I fought this fight years ago when I was in Congress, that the USDA was coming down and saying there couldn't be girls' events anymore, there couldn't be boys' events, that in the sport of rodeo from now on, There was just going to be events that everybody had to have open to them. And I was the only one that fought on the issue. In fact, I couldn't get other members of Congress to help me. I couldn't get my delegation or other governors to help stand up for protecting girls' sports years ago because they thought it was too tough of a political issue to deal with. And I won. We actually allowed the sport to continue the way that it always has. And so I was surprised that people were confused about my position on this. I'm not in the business of signing bad bills just so that they can end up in court and then I can't enforce anything in my state while it's tied up in litigation. So those executive orders are in place in the K-12 system and in college level sports in the state of South Dakota. Only girls can play girls sports, only boys can play boys sports. And then as soon as we go into legislative session, I'll get them signed into statute as well.
You know, the subject, you know, of this in schools, I think is a huge motivator for Republicans. I mean, we saw what happened to the suburbs in the last federal election we have. I think that that's going to be a big issue that's going to motivate a lot of people to vote, I think, in upcoming elections, because when you have people, when you start messing with their kids, you see what's happening. I mean, all of a sudden you have so many people engaging in school board meetings. You've got people really worried about me. When I was a kid, my parents had no clue what was going on at school, but I went there, I learned the basic stuff. You come home and that was it. You didn't have to think about this. You had a school district, you knew what your kid was getting, and it was fine. This changed a lot of stuff.
You know, and I actually think the discussion has helped us in that way. It's not really a big motivator just for Republicans. I think people that were not engaged before, now for the first time are looking at curriculums. They're showing up at school board meetings that people maybe never thought they would ever do or show up for before. So that might be a good thing. This might be the opportunity to get people back engaged in really deciding who their leaders are, who's the decision makers, and that it does matter. That's the one thing this pandemic should have taught us, is that leadership has consequences.
Among the myriad of stories about liberals in this country that the media seems to ignore, they're pushing now, there's a new story they're pushing now about you and about your daughter specifically.
Oh, yes.
I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. She was trying to get a real estate appraisal license. They're saying that something kind of funny happened. You had a meeting with somebody. What's the real story here?
Well, the real story is that my daughter received no special treatment. She did exactly what every other person did, applying and receiving an appraiser's license in the state of South Dakota. And this is another political attack. And, you know, I signed up for this job. I get it. They're going to attack me, and I realize that. Now they're going after my kids and trying to destroy my kids. And, you know, there was a point in time where people didn't do that. I realize we're in new territory now today, but while they completely ignore Hunter Biden, they're going after my daughter. And the one article that got published, you know, by the AP was filled with innuendos, a disgruntled employee that filed a lawsuit on age discrimination, nothing having to do with my daughter. Now they're taking quotes out of context. It's a political attack, and I get it, but, you know, these are my children, and it's unfortunate that they think they have to stoop that low.
Governor Noem, thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Very nice to see you here.
It was great to visit.
You just watched Newsmax TV, America's fastest growing cable news channel, now in more than 70 million homes. You can get Newsmax TV on your cable system or check your cable guide. And if your system doesn't carry Newsmax, call them, tell them you want Newsmax TV, because we're real news for real people.